One wrongful arrest exposes a nationwide corruption scheme. Introduction. They built a system, a perfect machine, a network of small towns where travelers vanished into jail cells, where judges handed down convictions without hesitation, and where officers planted evidence as easily as they wrote speeding tickets. A system that had operated in the shadows for years, unchecked, unstoppable. But all it takes is one mistake, one wrong person arrested, to bring the entire empire down. That mistake? Arresting David Carter. The setup. David Carter, a highly successful entrepreneur, had just left a major business deal in Houston. He was on his way home, reflecting on the triumph of his latest negotiations. Driving his sleek, black Mercedes S-Class, he felt unstoppable. But his success, his confidence, none of it would prepare him for what lay ahead. His GPS rerouted him through the small town of Ridgeway, a place he had never heard of. It was meant to save him 30 minutes, but it would cost him so much more. As he entered the town, he noticed how the streets were eerily quiet. The gas station looked outdated, almost frozen in time. When he pulled in to refuel, the weight of unseen eyes fell upon him. Inside the station, the clerk hesitated before accepting his payment. Outside, two elderly men sitting on a wooden bench whispered among themselves, stealing glances at his car. And across the street, a police cruiser idled, its occupants watching too closely. David felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Something wasn't right. The arrest. As soon as he pulled back onto the road, the police cruiser followed. He maintained the speed limit, his hands at 10 and 2. Then, the inevitable happened. Flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. David pulled over, calm but alert. Two officers approached. Officer Langley, the taller of the two, demanded his license and registration. The other, Officer Decker, circled behind the car. "Your taillight's out," Langley announced. "That's impossible," David replied. "I had it serviced last week." The officer didn't respond. Instead, the demand came, "Step out of the vehicle." David knew the routine. Keep his hands visible. Stay polite. Follow the script. But then, Decker held up a small bag. "Looks like we found something in your trunk." David's heart pounded. "That's not mine," he stated firmly. "And you had no probable cause to open my trunk." Langley smirked. "It was in plain sight. That's probable cause." The system at work. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He was pushed into the squad car. As the police scanner crackled, a voice on the other end chuckled. "Looks like we got another one." Inside Ridgeway Police Station, David saw how deep the corruption ran. Officers processed him with practiced ease, as if this was routine, because it was. The sergeant mocked his demand for a phone call. The district attorney, William Clayton, arrived with an offer. Plead guilty, accept a reduced sentence, and disappear quietly. David refused. They laughed at his protest. "You think you're special," the sergeant sneered. "You think you're above the law?" Hours passed. His demand for a phone call was ignored. They fed him processed food and locked him in a cold cell. But David knew one thing. They had made a mistake. Because his brother, Jonathan Carter, was no ordinary man. The turning point. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they allowed David one phone call. His fingers shook, not with fear, but with anticipation. He dialed the number he knew by heart. Jonathan Carter speaking. His older brother, the United States Attorney General. As soon as Jonathan heard the words, "false charges," the entire room shifted. Officers leaned in, curiosity flickering into panic. When David handed the phone to Sheriff Thomas Reynolds, the sheriff's face drained of color. "This is the U.S. Attorney General." Jonathan's voice was ice. "You are holding my brother illegally. Every officer involved is now under federal investigation." Panic erupted. Officers scrambled, deleting files, shredding papers. But it was too late. Justice arrives. Minutes later, the FBI stormed Ridgeway Police Station. Computers were seized. Case files reviewed. A horrifying truth unfolded. David's arrest wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a decades-long scheme, an operation designed to falsely imprison travelers, seize their assets, and funnel people into private prisons for profit. The extent of the corruption was staggering. They had records dating back nearly 20 years, People from out of town, with no ties to the community, pulled over under false pretenses. Every case followed a pattern: a fabricated violation, a staged search, and suddenly, evidence appeared. The accused were either forced into plea deals or left to fight a justice system that was rigged against them from the start. One by one, the corrupt officials fell. Langley and Decker were arrested. Sheriff Reynolds cracked under questioning. DA Clayton begged for a deal. But the deeper investigators dug, the darker the truth became. The bigger picture: it wasn't just Ridgeway. This system operated in dozens of towns, all connected to a powerful board of private prison executives, judges, and politicians. The deeper the investigation, the more horrifying the scale. The board operated under strict secrecy. They communicated in coded emails, funneled money through offshore accounts, and had backup plans for potential exposure. But they had not anticipated someone like David Carter, someone with connections, someone who would not go quietly. The FBI raids expanded. More towns, more departments, more arrests. Federal oversight committees were formed. Victims were identified, cases were reopened, and innocent men and women were freed. The fallout: senators, CEOs, and law enforcement officials fell like dominoes. News stations broadcast the takedown of one of the largest criminal enterprises in modern history. The judiciary system was exposed, revealing rigged courts and unjust convictions. And the private prison industry, built on human suffering, faced its reckoning. David Carter's wrongful arrest had sparked a revolution. The scale of the damage could never be fully undone. Families had been destroyed, futures stolen. But for the first time in decades, justice had turned its gaze upon those who had perverted its purpose. And it all started with one traffic stop on a quiet highway in Ridgeway. Lessons learned from the story. 1. The manipulation of power in a corrupt system. The story reveals how those in power can abuse the legal system to exploit innocent people. When authority goes unchecked, it can become a tool for organized crime, operating under the guise of justice without being stopped. 2. The strength of justice and determination. David Carter refused to back down, and his persistence exposed a long-standing corrupt system. Justice doesn't happen by itself. It requires people who are willing to fight for what's right. 3. Not everyone is lucky enough to be rescued. David was fortunate to have a powerful brother who could intervene, but how many innocent people have been caught in the same trap with no one to help them? This story highlights the urgent need for legal system reform and protection for all individuals. 4. Society's indifference only fuels injustice. Before the truth came out, many people chose to remain silent out of fear or ignorance. If we ignore injustice, it will continue to spread and could happen to anyone. Fighting for justice is not just the responsibility of the victims, but of the entire society. Personal perspective. I believe this story is not just an intriguing case, but a crucial lesson on how a system can be manipulated to destroy innocent lives. If we don't question authority, monitor those in power, and stand up for what's right, anyone could become the next victim. Justice does not belong only to those with power. It belongs to all of us. And sometimes, it only takes one person refusing to back down to bring down an entire corrupt system. Follow Story Precious. If you love emotional stories, deep life lessons, and eye-opening truths, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We bring you stories that touch the heart, events that make you think, and messages that inspire change. Click now. Story Precious, where stories are not just entertainment, but a wake-up call. Rocket Fire.